Welcome to The Friday Habit with Mark Labriola and Benjamin Manley. The Friday Habit is for small business owners, freelancers, and creatives who are ready to take their business to the next level. Join us as we discover how to apply the strategies we learned to grow our businesses, make more money, and live every day like it's Friday. And welcome back to The Friday Habit. It's going to be a good day. If you woke up this morning or this evening or whenever you're listening to this podcast, if you're feeling down or you're like, I don't know what's going on. Well, hey, wake up. It's okay. Everything's going to work out. Stay positive, make the best of every situation, work hard, do your best, and it's going to be okay. And today I'm excited to introduce my guest to you. We have a guy that I met randomly at an event this past fall in Austin, Texas. And I'm excited. I asked him to be on the show. His name is Shaun Lee. And he's currently serves as the COO at Mission Matters Group. He also is the co-founder of 6 Levers, where he focuses on helping teams develop better ways of working. So, Shaun, welcome to the Friday Habit.
Yeah, Mark, thanks so much for having me. It was great to meet you in that chance encounter. And so happy to be able to talk with you here today.
I know I was thinking about like when we were having that conversation and you were talking about, making work a better place to be and not always living in a place of burnout and frustration. And then you were talking about the 6 levers. I was like, you're exactly who our audience needs to hear from. And so I know it took a while, but I'm glad that we finally got you here and can just chat. So I would love to hear a little bit about your journey. I mean, you've done so many things. You've been involved in so many philanthropic type businesses, working with homeless and things like that. So I would love to maybe go back to the beginning of it all and kind of hear about your journey, which validates kind of who you are and has given you the experiences so that you can create systems like, the 6 levers. So, take us back. Where do we start?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity to share a bit of my story here. So over 20 years ago, I started as a social worker. And I was working with people experiencing homelessness in St. Louis, Missouri. I quickly realized, and I don't mean this to be like a backhanded way of building myself up, but I realized that I was far too empathetic to last as a social worker. The weight of the stories I was hearing just had a tremendous impact on me. Thankfully, I had an opportunity to be an administrator and a manager at that organization, and realized at like a very early age, when given that opportunity, that I just felt a lot of calling and purpose and leading people and building teams. And from that work there in St. Louis at an organization called St. Patrick's Center, I was then recruited to be a part of a founding team in San Antonio at an organization called Haven for Hope, which I didn't realize at the time, but would grow to be the largest residential campus for people experiencing homelessness in the U.S. So it was a true BHAG. It was a crazy goal come to life, part of the vision of the business and local government in San Antonio to really come together and build in a bipartisan and public-private way, like really making a difference and an impact on the issue of homelessness in a way that frankly had never been done before. And so it ended up attracting people like myself from all over the country to be a part of that vision. And so I got to serve in various capacities there. My final couple of years there was the COO. And along that journey, I decided to go get my MBA. And as part of that process, it really awoke this kind of entrepreneurial side of me, which, as I reflected back on my career, I realized was always there, but I was sort of living it out in the nonprofit sector, doing innovative things and, having the opportunity to work with innovative people in that space. But the MBA specifically launched me to start a business, a social entrepreneurship business, and grew that business for about 6 years. And just another crazy chance thing that I would have never guessed ended up meeting a guy named Jacob Pechenik, who was married to Zoe Deschanel. And we had a
She's
mutual
of the
friend
fame of Elf, right?
Right, of Elf and then
her
New
sister's
Girl.
on Bones too, I think, right?
Yeah, right. Yes, that's right. I that's about as much as I know about
the Deschanel
anything
family.
else, I'd say I don't know. We were introduced for them as a potential investor as we were growing our business, and they had taken an interest in like healthy eating and local food, and purchased a company in Austin and a company in LA. And long story short, they ended up buying our company. And they bought a company here in Austin called Farmhouse Delivery, and I ended up running that sort of joint venture for a short period of time, for a year, and then ultimately realized, while I was grateful for the opportunity and the relationship and connection there, that it was time for me to leave after about a year staying on, helping with the transition, and that led to a kind of venture into full-time consulting work, and all throughout that period, these different parts of my story that I've told here. Again, I think the common thread was equipping leaders, building strong teams, and just feeling a real calling and purpose to that. So I joined Mission Matters Group about 5 years ago, and really with a focus on equipping organizations to have an even bigger impact. And it was afforded a great opportunity to work with some great people, including a couple of my business partners, Joe Olwig and Josh Aranda, to not only initially we were leveraging other tools like how to develop OKRs and frameworks like EOS and even a lot of Patrick Lencioni's work, which is where we met, right? Like hearing him speak. And over time, we decided to develop our own framework, and that birthed the 6 Levers framework, which is an organizational operating system, really a set of tools and framework equipped to help leaders build intentional ways of working and enduring organizational health. So we launched that about a year ago or so, and I currently we've actually fully transitioned into that being its own entity, and
oh, nice.
And I'm spending all my time on that effort right now.
Yeah. What do you, as a young kid, I mean, were you always passionate about like philanthropic type work? I mean, it seems like you've done a lot of that throughout your career. Like, where do you think that heart came from? I mean, were your parents types of people that were always involved in stuff, or like, where did that come from?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. I had an experience when I was I was a freshman at Mizzou, where I went to college. And, honestly, I was at a time in my life where I didn't quite know what I didn't have a major selected. It was like my second semester. I was candidly feeling fairly directionless. And as I was walking the campus, I saw a flyer to become a volunteer in AmeriCorps. And I can't tell you what stirred, why I was stirred in that moment, but I was, and I showed up the next day to learn more about it. And I had time, and I was looking for direction, and I immediately just jumped into volunteering 3 days a week. I was also working and going to school, but I jumped into volunteering 3 days a week, and it just, I was 18, and it was the first time in my life where I was like, I just realized people are not all born in the same situations. We are all not afforded the same opportunities.
Yeah.
And there is such inequality in the world, and much of it having nothing to do with people's own work or effort, right? And so that inspired me to study social work and community organizing. That experience kind of launched my initial passion for social work and community work.
Well, and how better to find direction for your life. I feel like one of the things I always tell people, like if you feel maybe depressed or you feel directionless, like that might be a good time for you to start getting involved where you're serving other people, where you're not focused on yourself, but you're focused externally, because that's where I think we find meaning and purpose and fulfillment. And sometimes when we're focused on other things and other people, then that's when we get that spark of creativity or that inspiration or whatever it is to kind of drive us and pull us out of that funk and to give us direction. So I'm all about that. And, I think that's awesome, because I do feel like we're all like, not everybody has maybe the personality or the aptitude that you have to, because it's a lot of hard work for sure. It's like one of those things where you're dealing with maybe the marginalized people or, like it's difficult situations, that you're having to like navigate and very hard on your heart and emotional, wear and tear. And so, that you kind of found that connection there, and then have been able to kind of serve in different capacities throughout. I mean, I commend you because, this world, we need all sorts of types. We need the people who are on the ground doing the things. We need the people who are funding the things to get done. And so it's kind of like, we're the human race, we're the human body, and we all have purpose and meaning, to, fulfill, this world's calling. So I think that's pretty cool. So what did you find, throughout those years? Cause it seems like you worked in very like entry level positions, and then you worked obviously as like chief operating officer of these organizations. And so, what did you find, or what were you seeing in those organizations or situations that you were in where you're like, man, I see people, they're burnout or they're frustrated, they're feeling unfulfilled. Like, what was it that you were kind of constantly seeing? And then what was the solution that you're like, man, if we just knew X, Y, and Z, we could solve a lot of these problems?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I love that you're asking this question, because this is the very like inspiration for the framework that we've created. I mean, it's a significant part of the inspiration, I think, for myself and my two co-founders. So much of it was drawn upon our time as leaders, leading like growing operations of various sizes, from some small to like some like hundreds of people, in various capacities, like startups, the nonprofit I just described, and Joe spent his time in the education sector as a principal. We had this desire that I kind of described to create an environment where people could show up in the best way possible and bring as much of themselves as possible, and ideally go back home at least as good as they came, if not better. Right. And so not just like wanting them to bring all of themselves, but us feeling some great responsibility and saying, and how do we as leaders send them back well? And, and in our efforts and desire to do that, we were, and I'll just speak for myself, like I was so encountered with like the tyranny of the urgent and firefighting, and all these significant, urgent pressures that seem like they just dominated 80 to 90% of our time, of our mental and emotional thought process and just concern. And sometimes it was seasoned. Sometimes it felt like it would just in perpetuity, right? Like, and the efforts like I would put into play to address some of these things often felt like fits and starts. Like there'd be a little bit of progress, but then like something even bigger would emerge. And what I didn't have is like an overarching framework, or like what we would refer to as like an organizational operating system to lean into, right? Like as I encountered each issue, I was pulling on like a yet another tool, right? Or working through another book. And the cobbling that all together felt frankly just unsustainable, right? Like we would go through, like I even shared with you, it's how we met. Like I was incredibly inspired the first time I read through the book, The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni, and I took my leadership team at Haven for Hope through it. And we developed our own playbook from it, and it was great. Right. But that was one little thing like that. I mean, it's an important aspect of our identity. It was I don't mean to minimize the importance of it. It was a very important foundational aspect of how our culture would be built. But there were so many other things, and we lacked the tools and resources to build a healthy culture in a sustainable way. And then I'd also say, like, the other thing we realized and that I saw, like back in that scenario, so I had like 10 leaders of like leading 10 distinct and pretty important departments. And the health of those teams and departments were kind of all over the place, right? And so much of it depended on the experience that leader came in with, like, right, their drive and hunger, right, to want to develop other people. And sort of came down to, like, if they were wired that way towards building a healthy team and developing leaders, and the team was doing pretty well. But the systems they were putting in place to do that, they were largely leaning into themselves versus like us as an organization saying, like, here are some systems and tools that can give you a leg up and give you a chance to build a healthy team. We didn't have that. So our desire was to create it how do we help other leaders, like, not, they're still going to face challenges, right? But how do we help equip them to work in a more intentional way with a set of tools and resources that gives them a better chance than we feel like we had when we were in those roles?
Yeah, that's awesome. And I feel like, too, that's a great, like, leading by example, right? It's like, instead of you telling each one of these team leaders, like, hey, you guys need to, figure out how to be better leaders and, go out and do those things. You were saying, hey, let's solve these problems as the leaders of the leaders, and then give the leaders the tools that they need in order to be successful in their roles. And I feel like that is a recipe for just like a really healthy company. So I would love for you to maybe tell us what the 6 levers are, and then maybe just give us a brief overview, of each one of those levers, and just maybe a little description of, how it is, worked, and explain the levers to us, just the concept of, in my mind, I'm thinking, you're like a big switchboard and there's like all these levers that you're pulling down. It's like, all right, I need more compassion. All right, let's like pull this lever for more compassion. Like, I need more empathy, or whatever that is. Like, so what are these, like, what is that? Is it that kind of idea of pulling on these different areas in order to achieve like the perfect combination or mix of something?
Yeah, that is how it is, and I'll come back and address this one specifically. But maybe as a segue into that, I love that you were kind of saying, like, you were hearing that our heart was to equip leaders, right? Not just leave it up to their own devices. And I think part of what I would say here is we often see a misconception in organizations, and that people think it's what the problems they're facing, the symptoms they're seeing, are they classify it as like a people issue, right? Like, we don't have the right leader in the right seat, or they don't have the right experiences to do the job, versus what we actually believe is that more often than not, that's actually a systems problem. Right. So we go to, it's a people problem. They're not the right person. They're not equipped the right way. But actually, that's probably more likely a symptom of some system that has not been designed well. Right. And so if we work with a lot of teams to say, like, what we need to do is embrace a mindset of going upstream. Right. And so when we see these recurring problems, instead of continuing to play whack-a-mole, right, and just stay in firefighting mode, we have to pull on that thread, trace it back, do root cause analysis, go upstream, and build a new way of working, right, that helps so we don't stay in this state of firefighting, right? So, and build, when I say way of working, build a new system, right? So there's this part of our thesis of like the framework, and I'll go into the levers here in just a second, but is to like even start from a place of realizing that it takes a systems orientation as organizations get bigger and bigger, right, to understand that in order for us to drive healthy teams and healthy work, like, we really have to design the most important aspects of how we work with intention and build those systems and do them, invite people into that process, right? So if we think about, well, our fundamental human needs around like belonging and connection and contribution, right? Well, that means that in order for those systems to work and thrive, people need to be a part of creating them, right? So not just like it's the leader's system, but it's the team system. The team is building it together. It will be that much more likely to survive. So
yeah, they take ownership of it at that point, right? If they feel that they've been a part of building it, then it's like, all right, like I helped do this, so now I want to participate in this.
That's right. Exactly. And so it's like with those set of beliefs that we even enter into, even before you would access the levers, right? You would say, like, I have these beliefs, hopefully, like the teams that gravitate towards our framework in the organizations, like they would come like in alignment, right? With some level of alignment, whether they can fully articulate it like that or not,
right.
No worries, but there'd be some level of alignment in wanting to build ways of working in that way. So that being said, so then like if you come with that, then you say, okay, well, we need a framework to be able to access, to do just that, right? To build better ways of working, and to intentionally design our organizational operating system. Now we've built a framework that you can lean into to do that work. So we think about the levers in two ways. You can think about them as an indicator and a lever. So before we go to the levers, the indicator is that, like, as you understand a little bit about each lever, you can quickly do like a self-assessment of your team or your organization and say, so I'll quickly I'll name them and then I'll go back through them, but it's identity, focus, cohesion, leadership, rhythm, and momentum. Okay. In no particular order. This is not a linear model, and I'll say more about that in a minute here. But within each of those, so let's say you learn about focus, and like focus needs work for your team when you feel like, gosh, I've got like 37. It feels like we have like 37 important things we're working on. And if you ask me what are the 3 or 4 most important ones for my team, and you survey different people, you might hear different things, right? We don't have actually a practice of even establishing what our most important priorities as a team are. And we certainly don't have a way of monitoring and adjusting those things. That's getting a little bit into rhythm, but you would start there and say, now that with a little understanding of focus, I think we need to do some work in strengthening our focus, right? So that they're an indicator in that way. As you learn about each of them, you would say, send that through the filter of how your own team is performing. And you might say, we've got some work we need to do there. We also have an assessment. They could give you a score in that, but the leaders that know their teams can quickly have a pulse on as they learn about each of the levers, like where they are. So they're an indicator in that way. They're a lever in that when you pull on them, there's very practical tools and resource. So more than theory, more than ideas. When you have that realization, my team needs to be more focused. Well, how do we do that? There's some real practical tools and resources that they can access. So that's kind of like orientation to how we think about the framework. Would you like for me to go through each of the 6 levers?
Yeah, I would just love what it is, just a brief, description. And yeah, I mean,
cool.
I think that'd be awesome and just, helpful for all of us.
Cool. Again, so they're not linear, but I'm gonna.
So explain that a little bit. I mean, because typically, it's kind of like there's usually a linear process with some sort of development that's taking place where it's like, all right, you go to step 1, and then you go to step 2, and then step 3, and you kind of climb this ladder of development. Like once you've reached this part, then you can move to this part.
Right. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I wish that our model was like that because it would be easier to communicate. But, but most days I don't wish that, because the reality is the reason we have such a strong conviction about this is because, I get the pleasure of meeting leaders from all over the world and understanding what they're facing, the challenges they're facing, and they are not in the same place, right? So if I meet with one team, I'm going to hear a story that leads me to believe that the best thing for them to start might be in clarifying their identity. They have a loose sense of their mission, but beyond that, there's work to do. Another team is going to need to work on strengthening their cohesion and working on agreements and without going through them all. And other teams are going to need to first start in leadership development. And I'll say what we've learned about organizational change is that when you, as consultants, right, and when you encounter a team and they're ready for some type of change, it's very important to be attentive to where they are energized to change, right? Where they are motivated and already feeling a little bit of momentum to get started in somewhere. And if you turn to them and say, "Hey, I hear you, but actually we must start over here," right? We don't believe that's the right way to drive organizational change. So we try and meet, and we also believe in this like strong progress, this principle of progress, right? Like once we make some progress and we build some momentum and driving some meaningful change, it's going to increase hopefulness, right? Which is then going to feel like almost unstoppable, right? And then we're going to get to being able to transform many, many parts of the way we work. But it's less important that we start in the same spot every time, and more important that we start in the place that is more likely to gain momentum, wherever that may be.
Right.
Now, sometimes that means that like when they come to us and they think they want to start in a certain place and we're listening and discerning what they need, we may disagree with them. We may say, "Hey,
like, we need leadership development." And you're like, "No, I think you need focus, priorities, goals, strategies. We got to focus on that kind of stuff."
Right. Yeah. Certainly. Exactly. So we will push back and share like some of our perspective from our experiences working with lots of organizations and offer that, and ultimately we'll come to an agreement on the best place to start. So that's just a little bit philosophy on what we mean by nonlinear. That being said, I'll go through them each and say that much of our work does start in identity. So even though it's not a requirement, I'd say there's kind of like three major pathways that we work with organizations in. And it's like strategic planning. The second one is developing what we call essential team habits. And the third one is around like just leadership development. And we engage each of the levers to be able to help organizations do that. When we're doing that strategic planning work, we first start with in the identity lever. And the identity lever is all about like the soul of the organization, why they exist, what they believe, and how they work with each other. We often say, if you've heard of the idea of mission drift, we believe like, well, it's actually fairly easy to drift away from your mission when a mission is all you have, right? But if you have these like a deeper sense of the foundation of your organization and your identity, and in our framework, we have these 6 components of identity that clarify your theory of impact, your beliefs, your vitals, like how you measure your sustainability and health over time. Your tenets, which are your beliefs about how you want work to work. Like when those are all there, it's much more difficult to drift away from something that is that deeply rooted, right? So the reason we often start here is because of a few additional beliefs we have. One is that we want teams to engage in purposeful growth, right? Not growth for growth's sake, but when their identity is clear, then growth naturally manifests out of that in a way that feels much more tethered and connected to their deep identity. And they can do that as a team once they've done that work together. And then also, just like James Clear talks about in Atomic Habits, our habits are much more likely to stick when they come out of a deep sense of identity, right? So the same is true for teams. Right. Like their ways of working, their routines, their norms, when they're inspired by their identity, they're much more likely to stick, right? Versus like, let's just jump into, like we often I hear things from teams like, "Oh, we need to strengthen operations. We need a bunch of SOPs for XYZ." And it's like, before we do that, let's start with our philosophy and principles about how we believe work should work, right? Then we can go into building and strengthening our operations, but let's align first in our principles about how we want work to work. And that's part of identity. I mentioned focus already, but I'll just maybe a little bit more to say on that is it's just about clarifying a handful of priorities at different time horizons and equipping teams to be able to set priorities together and to be able to monitor and make adjustments to those. It's probably of all the levers, it's the one that I think plagues almost everybody, right? Where it feels like everyone feels like sort of scattered, like prone to abandon their goals, prone to chase exciting new things and forget about the things that maybe they've sort of half-heartedly committed to. So the focus lever is about leaning into setting priorities as a team. And it's not necessarily about like we must stick to them, but it's about understanding if we do adjust, what are we now saying no to? And what's the cost of our yes? Because we have set some priorities together. And how do we do that as a team?
Well, and it's so important too, because I feel like, setting those priorities and focusing on one thing, it's easier then to measure the results of those things, right? It's like if we're constantly bouncing from thing to thing, then it's like we really don't have any good data to go off of to see if something's working or not. And I always tell people, it's like, especially with podcasting, it's one of those things where, someone puts up a podcast and then they think like, all right, I'm going to be the next, Joe Rogan or whatever. I'm going to 1 million downloads. Right. And I say, really, it's about being consistent over a long period of time produces results. And you don't know what kind of impact that maybe a certain episode or maybe a short or a clip that comes from that reaches the right person. And it's not really about the amount of downloads that you're getting, but it's about the kind of the impact that you're making by doing that thing. But if you give up after a couple months of putting out, an episode every other week, and then you're like, I don't see any results. It's like, well, we're not really getting enough data to see if this is actually, beneficial or not. So yeah, I mean, I hear you. People are so easy to get distracted by new technology and AI and, all these other kind of things. And then it's hard for them to stay focused on one thing. And then it's like, you start to see results. Like when you have a group of people focusing on one thing, it's like, oh, wow, I'm starting to see that needle move. And sometimes that can be the start of kind of that snowball where it's like, all right, I just need to push this up to get to a certain point.
Totally. And I think, that makes me think of the importance of, when you set short-term priorities, being able to name and claim those wins, right? Mm-hmm. And for what they are, as opposed to, I think, and I'm guilty of this. So I think what we've developed is out of our own like shortcomings, right? And saying our own, I have a tendency to like set an ambitious goal and then hit it and be like, okay, cool, let's go on to the next one. Right? So, right. But I know that's not healthy and that's not good. It's not something I'm proud of. But it's something that I see a lot of driven leaders do, right? They set goals and then they just sort of like hit it and they're on to the next thing. Versus like one of the benefits of focus is like being able to measure the accomplishment of something significant and including even progress towards it, right? Like even if you don't completely do it, like I've been exposed to other frameworks where it's either like you did it or you didn't. And it's like, well, I don't think that's right. Like you can make significant progress and experience significant learning when you fall just short. And that is so meaningful. And to act like it's not meaningful, right, I think is just silly, right? So, so we're trying to equip our teams to see those things, right, and to because they're contagious, right? When we can talk about the progress we made, learn from it, continue to set new priorities that are building upon what we've already accomplished, or adjusting from the things that didn't go the way we thought they would go. Which maybe that's a segue to, I'll talk about leadership and team cohesion as the two other levers. These things I'm talking about require a strong foundation of psychological safety, right? So, in order for me to, it's one thing for me just to say, hey team, we need to show up and we need to be all about learning and agile adjustments. That would also require the team to be able to take an honest and sincere look at how we did and openly talk about when we fall short, right? And creating an environment of making mistakes, taking some chances, and it being okay. Well, all of that requires a strong foundation of psychological safety. So we see that as sort of like the beginning of what's required for cohesive teams and the cohesion lever. And then also the reason this spans cohesion and the leadership lever in our framework is that it's the shared responsibility of everyone on the team. And yet the data tells us that the manager of the team has an outsized influence on the experience of psychological safety. It just is true. Like the data, like people, we've all heard it. They leave their job because of who their manager is. Yeah. The variation of psychological safety when studied across teams, the number one factor is who the manager is, right? So while everyone has the ability to, and should be invited in that process, it's acknowledging that the leader has an outsized influence there. So, and that directly coordinates to engagement, right? And how do we intentionally deepen engagement? And the work we do with leaders is really helping them to be mindful of and tend to and understand the underlying human needs that we all have, right? And say, how do we deepen engagement through understanding those needs and building ways of working that meet those needs, right? So let's say I have a high need for contribution, right? It's why I'm an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
I don't do well on teams where I feel like my ability to contribute is minimal or non-existent, right? Like I lose interest pretty quickly. So I've got a high need for contribution. If you're working with me, it's important that you know that. And like I'm working with other people, they might have a high need for belonging, right? My need for belonging may not be as high as theirs. We all have belonging and contribution, but how dialed up they are is going to vary between the two of us. So when we're as leaders, when we're designing ways of working and better ways of working for our teams, the most important thing we think you can do is understand those needs so that you build strategies and ways of working that meet those needs. Otherwise, we're just trying random stuff, right? We're just like, let me try this. Maybe it'll be better here. And yet maybe we hit the needs of our team. Maybe we don't.
Right.
So we spend time at that leadership level really helping leaders to tend to and understand what those needs are and then design ways that accomplish them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can see how the cohesion and leadership kind of go, you can't have one without the other, And so it's like developing those kind of in tandem or, making sure that the leadership is right so that the cohesion and the team can be, correct. And it kind of reminds me of like the idea of, you remember Gary Chapman? He had that book, Love Languages.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I haven't read that book in a long time.
I know. It's like a blast from the past. Like, what is this, the 90s? Like, But I remember it's like this idea, and I know it helped me with my marriage, right? It's like we all have different love languages, right? And it's some of us need quality time and words of affirmation or physical touch, whatever the gifts. Yeah. And I think it's similar to like on the working team, right? To like feel that fulfillment is like trying to understand what is that language of that person to feel fulfillment in their job, because it's not going to be the same across the board and for everybody. And so it takes a self-aware leader, right, to understand that and then kind of work with their team and develop to build that foundation and cohesionness.
Totally. And there's so many great tools. I think one of the things I'd say too is like we're of the belief that really at the end of the day there's nothing new under the sun, right?
Yeah.
So what we've done is hopefully package and organize some things in a way they feel more accessible, but they're certainly building upon other great frameworks and leaders and authors. To your point, and something like the love languages. So. But yeah, I think for the leader and even for like any member of a team, first understanding themselves, right? Which is, by the way, is another important part of the work that we encourage teams and leaders to dive into the leadership level, is just a greater understanding of self-awareness and leading from within, and ultimately from a place of like, at the end of the day, if you can't control it, if you can control anything, it's you, right? And then. And then from there, working on intentionally developing others. But certainly that self-awareness is probably the best place to start. And from a modeling perspective, which hopefully the outflow of that is vulnerability, right? Which leads to increased psychological safety. So maybe moving over to the last two would be rhythm, and rhythm is about designing, think about your most important strategic aspects of your work and bringing intentionality into them so you don't leave them to chance, right? So something like moving forward are the goals that we set and focus. Like, well, how do we engineer some of our meetings to review some of those things, right? To not leave that by chance. I think the most common one of the most common problems we still step into is like the strategic plan that just sits on a shelf, right? And so the tools in the rhythm lever go a long way to help activate a vision. But they do more than that. They're also meant to give teams a chance to build stronger connections, and really to think about like, how do we first start by, if we were just talking about meetings for a second here, so many of us are engaged in showing up to recurring meetings, and we've never taken the time to say, what is the objective of us getting together every Tuesday at 2 p.m. for 45 minutes? I don't know. Yeah. Like, why don't we just start there and say, like, what is that? And then once we know that, okay, we're clear on the objective, what's the best way to design this meeting rhythm to achieve that objective, right? So we start from that place. And I'd say it's not just meetings, right? It also includes asynchronous rhythms. If you start with that objective, you likely will come out of that time and realize some of the things we were doing don't need to be synchronous, right? The five of us don't have to be in the same room together to be up to speed and on the same page with everything we're doing here. Like, there's things that we need to actively collaborate on and work through because they're complex. Right. And they need our synchronous time together. There's other things that are like quick updates about the status of, something in my department or project that I can share in an asynchronous way and give the gift of giving people some time back. Right. So,
I know.
But it takes but it's also, I mean, I think there's, there's the meme of like, that could have been an email. Right. But I think I'm not suggesting that it's all one or the other. It's about the discernment, right?
Yes.
Of when should we do synchronous work collaboratively together, and when can we collaborate asynchronously, right? And that's what the rhythm lever is all about. How do we design with intention these recurring rhythms to achieve certain objectives? And the last one is momentum. And momentum is many ways is like the spirit of the whole framework. And yet it also has its own set of tools and resources. So when we're teaching on this, we actually start with I don't know if this is the formal name for it, but the marshmallow experiment. Or have you heard of this, Mark?
No, but it sounds delicious.
You'll go look it up now, but it's a study where there some dried spaghetti sticks and marshmallows, and it's sort of a little engineering exercise, and they have different people groups, kindergartners to people with MBAs, right? And they give them an amount of time to build like the biggest structure, and the surprising result is that the kindergartners win. And so we kind of enter into the momentum lever of saying, well, what can we learn from the way the kindergartners worked? Well, they leaned into learning by doing, right? They didn't say, hey, Mark, how about you're the guy that organizes the spaghetti sticks, and I'll be the person who evaluates how well you're doing. And somebody else, can you line up all the marshmallows in a line? They didn't do any of that, right? They just got into doing it, and they made adjustments through what they saw. Right. So they were agile. They did it, and they made quick adjustments. Their communication pattern was like really quick and rapid. Right. And it was, and because they didn't have sort of some of the constraints of these different social norms, they were able to move pretty quickly. So not to say we should always be like a kindergartner, but in some ways we should. Yeah. And I actually have a kindergartner, so I'm thinking to myself, in some ways I'd be happy to, in other ways I don't want to, but, but in addition to that, the momentum lever, another significant part of it is creating what we call a culture of feedback. And this is where feedback is normalized, right? Both precise praise and adjusting feedback. And the reality is, for a lot of teams, the idea of, well, first, when they think of feedback, they only think of something that's like hard and to bring, and usually it's something like negative, right? Like that I have to share that's going to be hard for me to share. And so we want to like think about feedback differently. So that's not just adjusting, but it includes a lot of precise praise and much more, like at a 4 or 5 to 1 ratio, where there's a culture of just regular feedback given that's affirming the good things that are happening. And then like real practical, tangible ways that we can bring adjusting feedback that makes it much more possible that people will hear it, right? So that instead of, if someone doesn't have the right tool set when they come into it, the other person the defenses are going to go up, right? But if we start with an observation and we share the impact of that observation, ultimately teeing up to the third part, which is a dialogue, right? Then we're much more likely to have a conversation about it. And then the person will be much more likely to take ownership of the feedback they're given because they were given a chance to participate in it. So when this culture of feedback begins to take root, some of these momentum mantras like learning by doing that I mentioned before, when these start to take root, teams can experience some really meaningful momentum, which, as I mentioned towards the top here, that can build a lot of hopefulness and the type of change that can really transform the way a team works.
Yeah. What do you think is like what size of team do you need, do you think, before you start thinking about this kind of stuff? Have you seen it more effective where it's like, it's like either too big or too small? Like, what does that look like, you think?
Yeah, I'd say, you know, there does need to be like a felt amount of complexity before you feel like you need a system like the size of the you know, the framework that we've built. So I'd say if you're thinking about like the appropriate fit for applying a lot of the framework, it's usually an organization with hundreds of people. Now, that being said, we've done some work with founders and startups on parts of the framework that has felt really meaningful, you know, such as helping them clarify their identity and their vision. We do that work that results in like a 3 to 4 page compass that can inform a lot of marketing messages, right? That are like from our deep sense of purpose and identity. So I've even talked to a lot of people in the market that are, I think that's you, right? Like you're full time, right?
That's
you probably do this work. Yeah.
Brand
right,
Viva.
Right. Yes. Right. So, I mean, who've said like when we work with organizations that have a clear sense of their identity, that makes our work that much easier. Right.
100%.
So yeah, there are aspects that even a single founder could take on. But I'd say where organizations are going to find the most benefit of it is when they start to have multiple teams, right? And they want to scale common ways of working across the different teams in their organization. So we're often stepping into that particular challenge of we want our teams to be running on a common set of tools and systems, and we need a framework to help do that. Sometimes it's through, we've worked with some mergers and acquisitions where it's like, in order to build like one common culture, we want to, through like a real humbleness of two organizations saying like, it doesn't have to be our way or our way. Let's do a new way. Right. So let's embrace like this 6 levers framework as a way that we can come together and build a new way of working together that allows like equal contribution of two different organizations coming together. It's also been sometimes, I think the other common one that we step into is sort of like transitions in leadership from in particular like founders who have been around for a long time. Like I just started working with a company who the 2 founders are in their early 60s, and they said we want to work for 2 more years. And we don't have a lot codified in how we work here. And we feel like in order for us to do that, we really need to establish more clarity of who we are, the way we work. And so they're kind of engaging on this like 2-year journey to hand off to a next generation of leaders. Cool. Right. So yeah, those are some of the use cases where we commonly step into.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what are you working on right now? Like what's going on? Like, where are you directing people, you know, if they want to get in touch or like learn more about this or have you come in and like, you know, help them out? What do you got going?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Mark. I mean, one significant thing is we just finished the manuscript on the framework for a book,
nice.
which I should better not say the title in case it might change. But I'm 90% sure we have a title, but I won't say it yet. And that will come out sometime mid-year. So I don't know when this will air, but it'll come out sometime mid-year, and we're excited about that. And then just in general, you can go to 6levers.co to learn all about our services and offerings. We always have a Leading with Intention course. Like we always have another one about to start. Cool. So you can check that out, and anybody can drop into that. You can also there's contact forms on the website if you're interested in engaging in any consulting services with us. We also have a free organizational health assessment that anybody can take. And so you can, when you hit our website, you'll see how to do that. And we're happy to share those results that teams take as a way for them just to get some initial understanding of their score in each of the 6 levers.
Awesome. Shaun, thanks so much, man. Thanks for being here with me and, sharing about the 6 levers. And I know that this is the kind of stuff that as small teams and bigger teams and as leaders, these are the things that a lot of times get pushed to the sides because we're just trying to survive. We're just trying to grow the business. We're just trying to, grow teams, whatever that is. But, this is the kind of stuff that really makes a difference, and that we really needed to pause and take ownership of. So I appreciate you coming on and sharing with me and our audience. So
yeah, Mark, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Easy conversation. So I always appreciate that. So, hey, and thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to The Friday Habit. Make sure you head over to thefridayhabit.com. There you can find show notes for this episode. There you can also find links to our websites and ways to get in touch. And at the bottom of the page, you can download our guide to the Friday Habit system that'll show you how to set aside one full day each week to dedicate working on your business instead of always in your business. And, if you want to leave us a voice memo, you can go ahead and do that at hello@thefridayhabit.com. And remember, live every day like it's Friday.